Students who acquire large debts putting themselves through school are unlikely to think about changing society. When you trap people in a system of debt, they can't afford the time to think. The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. Optimism is a strategy for making a better future, because unless you believe that the future can be better, you are unlikely to step up and take responsibility for making it so. Hypocrites are those who apply to others the standards that they refuse to accept for themselves. We shouldn't be looking for heroes. We should be looking for good ideas. It's very important for institutions of concentrated power to keep people alone and isolated. That way, they're ineffective. They can't defend themselves against indoctrination. They can't even figure out what they think. I'm not a committed pacifist. I would not hold that it is under all imaginable circumstances wrong to use violence, even though use of violence is in some sense unjust. I believe that one has to estimate relative justices. Unless the powerful are capable of learning to respect the dignity of their victims, impassable barriers will remain, and the world will be doomed to violence, cruelty, and bitter suffering. All over the place, from the popular culture to the propaganda system, there is constant pressure to make people feel that they are helpless, that the only role they can have is to ratify decisions and to consume. There's plenty to criticize about the mass media, but they are the source of regular information about a wide range of topics. You can't duplicate that on blogs. If you are teaching today what you were teaching 5 years ago, either the field is dead or you are. Language is a process of free creation. Its laws and principles are fixed, but the manner in which the principles of generation are used is free and infinitely varied. Even the interpretation and use of words involves a process of free creation. I did used to have nightmares about the idea that when I die, there's a spark of consciousness which basically creates the world. Is the world going to disappear if this spark of consciousness disappears? And how do I know it won't? How do I know there's anything there except what I'm conscious of? Everybody's worried about stopping terrorism. Well, there's a really easy way. Stop participating in it. There are very few people who are going to look into the mirror and say, "That person I see is a savage monster." Instead, they make up some construction that justifies what they do. The intellectual tradition is one of servility to power, and if I didn't betray it, I'd be ashamed of myself. Nationalism has a way of oppressing others. The United States is unusual among the industrial democracies in the rigidity of the system of ideological control. Indoctrination, we might say, exercised through the mass media. The more you can increase the fear of drugs and crime, welfare mothers, immigrants, and aliens, the more you control all the people. It's perfectly obvious that there is some genetic factor that distinguishes humans from other animals, and that is language specific. The theory of that genetic component, whatever it turns out to be, is what's called universal grammar. The United States was seriously defeated in Iraq by Iraqi nationalism, mostly by nonviolent resistance. The United States could kill the insurgents, but they couldn't deal with 500,000 people demonstrating in the streets. Some of the most moving experiences I've had are just in black churches in the South during the civil rights movement, where people were getting beaten, killed, really struggling for the most elementary rights. The process of shaping opinion, attitudes, and perceptions was termed the engineering of consent by one of the founders of modern public relations industry, Edward Bernays. Our only real hope for democracy is that we get the money out of politics entirely and establish a system of publicly funded elections. The probability of apocalypse soon cannot be realistically estimated, but it is surely too high for any sane person to contemplate with equanimity. Any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the US media. The major advances in speed of communication and ability to interact took place more than a century ago. The shift from sailing ships to telegraph was far more radical than that from telephone to email. If there was an observer on Mars, they would probably be amazed that we have survived this long. If we don't believe in freedom of expression for people we despise, we don't believe in it at all. Rational discussion is useful only when there is a significant base of shared assumptions. Changes and progress very rarely are gifts from above. They come out of struggles from below. Either you repeat the same conventional doctrines everybody is saying, or else you say something true and it will sound like it's from Neptune. Growing up in the place I did, I never was aware of any other option but to question everything. When you look at a corporation, just like when you look at a slave owner, you want to distinguish between the institution and the individual. So slavery, for example, or other forms of tyranny are inherently monstrous. The individuals participating in them may be the nicest guys you can imagine. Under the worst conditions, horrendous conditions, people still, fight for their rights and don't just succumb. If we choose, we can live in a world of comforting illusion. If you don't like what someone else has to say, argue with them. You can live within the institutions and work hard to change them. Education must provide the opportunities for self-fulfillment. It can at best provide a rich and challenging environment for the individual to explore in his own way. Anyone can be a moral individual, concerned with human rights and problems, but only a college professor, a trained expert, can solve technical problems by sophisticated methods. Ergo, it is only problems of the latter sort that are important or real.